Join our Patreon.
Do you really want to know? We are Mythvision.
Dr. Price, let me read you this. You mentioned that other cult leaders may have been swallowed up into the Christian movement. Some of these leaders, like John the Baptist, the cousin, James the Just, brother, whatever that may mean, Apollos, I am of Paul, I am of Apollos. Apollos, you said, could possibly mean Apollonius of Tyana, because one of the early sources says Apollonius, which is interesting, not sure. And then, of course, Saul, Paul, or Simon Magus. Can you give evidence of something like this happening for us to see it in another religion or other examples? Too often we've been told these characters play a role for Jesus, and one who has been taught the story the Christian way usually will never see how this is possible. We're taught these guys are who they are as the story depicts them in the way we've been told to look at them. James is his brother, John the Baptist is his cousin, whatever it may be, but you've kind of elaborated on that in previous videos on how some of this stuff is, but can you give examples outside of how that happened? Just like Christianity, because they want to say this religion's unique and different. Well, not necessarily.
Yeah, I was fairly close to one instance of this where it actually happened in the Unification Church. I've known many Unificationists and been to many of their events and dialogues and written for their journal. There was a man named David Kim who believed he was the Lord of the Second Advent, the man who would complete the mission that Jesus started, that Jesus managed to accomplish spiritual salvation on the cross, but betrayed by John the Baptist, basically, who should have rallied Israel around him but didn't. He was too discouraged and doubted. Jesus couldn't complete physical salvation, which he had intended to do by marrying Mary Magdalene. Martin Luther believed that he did marry her. But they were to have renewed the human race with perfect children, and that others could be baptized into that holy family. And that's why the Moonies used to have all these mass weddings. I've been to a couple of them in Madison Square Garden. People that did not even know each other before Reverend Moon said, okay, you and you. And they figured it was like he had the revelation from God. And let's see, so...
is she hot? Oh, okay, I'll marry her. Just kidding.
Well, Mr. Kim, as they called him, believed he was the one that would initiate this, but he came in contact with Sun Myung Moon, who believed the same thing about himself, and Mr. Kim thought he had a good case. He said, okay, you're the one. I'm like the bridegroom hearing the best man hearing the bridegroom's voice and rejoicing. So he became a leader in the Unification Church and renounced his claim of being the Lord of the Second Advent in favor of Reverend Moon. So that's a case where it actually happened. But there are other ones where, well, another one that's sort of close to that is in the Baha'i faith. The Bab, which B-A-B, which means the gate, the gate to the hidden Imam. The Bab claimed that revelation was a cyclical process and that God sent a point of manifestation, not an incarnation, but it kind of amounts to the same thing, every, hundreds of years at least would pass, and that he was the manifestation since Muhammad, and before him it was Jesus, and so on back into the Old Testament. And he said, I'm not the last one, there'll be another one many hundreds of centuries from now. Well, he was martyred. And so what happened after that? Well, a disciple of his, whom he had never actually met but corresponded with, decided by revelation that he was the next one. And he took the name Baha'u'llah, the glory of Allah. And it's a big deal. You know how in Christianity there was the delay of the parousia. They kept waiting, it never happened. It was just the reverse in this case. It wasn't supposed to happen for many centuries, but shortly after the death of the Bab, Baha'u'llah appears and says, well, you know, he's coming at an hour you do not expect. I am the next guy. I'm sure he meant it. To look at the kind of person he was, very enlightened in many ways. But what did he say about the Bab? He was the forerunner of Baha'u'llah. Well, the Bab would never have said this had he lived to see what happened, but they drafted him into that position. And so there was a split. You had the Babis and the Azalis and the Baha'is. And the Baha'is, I think the other two sects are still around, but they're very small, whereas the Baha'i faith is, albeit sparsely sprinkled, a world religion. And a really interesting one. I have great respect for the Baha'is. Okay, so that kind of happened. They drafted him after the fact, very much like Jesus and John the Baptist. Well, let's see. If you want to go further afield than that, it's interesting to see how Hindus have drafted the Buddha as an avatar of Vishnu. Some have, and also Jesus. They say, yeah, we've got nothing against him. He must have been an avatar of the god Vishnu. Christians don't think this, but so what? Buddhists often say that Jesus was a bodhisattva. And that brings me to another one in a minute, but other Hindus take a dimmer view of the Buddha and claim that he was sent by the Asuras, the Titans, the kind of demonic foes of the gods, and that they taught the Buddha and sent him to just screw everything up. But in both cases, the Buddha becomes a theological, mythical character in Hindu thought.
Whether good or bad.
Yeah.
Right.
And my favorite example would be that of Saint Ayadasaph. Oh boy, this is great. I wrote a whole book on this called Biblical Buddhism. And in this one, the story of the great renunciation of Prince Siddhartha, a rich kid who finally has got to look at the world around him with a terrible poverty and illness and stuff. And he said, I got to do something about this. I love the implied unwitting arrogance of this, if it was really true. This guy was so concerned, he is going to find a way to change one of the facts of life. And that is so amazing. So he leaves and he studies and meditates with ascetics and so on. And then he realizes they don't really have the answer. He sits beneath the Bodhi tree and is finally enlightened and comes up with the Eightfold Path and all of that stuff. Well, this story was enormously popular. It spread all over the ancient world. The Manichees had it. It exists even now in loads of different language versions. And they apparently knew who this guy was. He was a bodhisattva, a Buddha in training, but his name kept getting garbled as it went into one language after another. And by the time medieval Catholics heard this story, which they loved, they said, oh, this is a story about a European prince who renounced his wealth to seek salvation and became a Catholic saint. The name or the title Bodhisattva became Ayadasaph, and there were other versions, Joasaph, etc., etc., and they canonized him. So you had, amazingly, unwittingly, the Catholic Church canonizing the Buddha as a saint. Oh man, what a great piece of serendipity. This goof that came out of honoring the story. They just didn't realize the story was. And that's why I wrote Biblical Buddhism. I thought, imagine if there was a Buddhist Catholic saint, what possibilities would this open up? So I have this guy who's like a Tibetan Lama, basically, Saint Ayatosaf, who teaches Buddhist doctrine through New Testament texts, and it wasn't tough to find them. There's so many that make similar points, and so I got that published. But there is a great example of conscripting a major character in another religion. You could say that Jesus in Islam, in the Quran, is another case of it. He is predicting Muhammad. He denies that he himself is divine and so forth. He's been picked up and added. So it happens. We know of even more or less contemporary cases.
It sounds like, and to give like more of a, I guess, a magnifying glass, because that's pretty broad, right? And it would appear broad, especially when you get to people who are very sticklers about, in the specific cultural milieu, this and that. I suspect when a lot of these religions started, there were a variety of sects, just like there was a variety of different Christianities. Or different, maybe not even just a variety of different Christianities, a variety of different religious movements in the contemporaneous time frame in which Christianity works, like the Mandeans and others, etc., that are competing. So they're vacuuming them up to try and either defeat them in a way or trying to co-opt them. And I guess I was wanting to get examples. Possibly did Buddhists do that with other Buddhist sects around them? You gave us good examples, though, I think. I just didn't know if there was anything, because someone might go, yeah, that's cool and interesting, but you didn't nail him on the cross. Like, can you give us another religious, cultural milieu in which a variety of sects takes place and they're vacuuming these people up, like you did with the Old Testament characters? Why are the Edomites being somehow either they're bad or they're good or they're being co-opted? Oh, duh! You didn't know Esau was their dad, or you can go back and find the parent, and they find a way to mesh these cultures and people together. I suspect it's bigger than just the Bible that this happens. It's probably more often. And this was off the cuff that I asked you this question, but I didn't know if you knew any other examples like what we see in the New Testament as direct in the cultural milieu that it was happening. Does that make sense?
Well, I tried to pick out named characters or individuals who are definitely to be identified with these characters from previous religions and all of that, where they appear suddenly in a whole different context, misunderstood or reinterpreted. The same thing doesn't happen to all of them, but then again, that's not what we're talking about here. It's a question of, did they scoop up these opposite people? And I have theories about a couple of others, like I would be willing to bet that one day they're going to... another one, Balaam the Prophet. Apparently he existed, or at least he was thought to, because archaeologists have discovered some sort of a plaque or plate or whatever that says that the prophecies of Balaam, and there's not much left of it, but they're short little things that people thought he predicted. And he appears as a prophet of Yahweh, though kind of a weird one, in the Old Testament. And that's quite likely a case of that. But I would just bet one day someone will discover an epic of Goliath that it just seems to me he must have been the Hercules of the Philistines. And one day, so that the biblical writers saying, well, our guy can beat yours. And so I don't know, but I have a hunch he's been taken up that way too.
Interesting. Thank you, Dr. Bob. join our Patreon